Have you ever imagined being chosen by God, not because of your strength, your influence, or your place in the world, but because of the condition of your heart? Imagine standing in a palace filled with power, wealth, and ambition, knowing that every eye is on you, yet only one voice truly matters, the voice of God. This is the story of Solomon, the son of David, a young man thrust into a kingdom teetering on the edge of chaos. A kingdom where brothers plot in the shadows, allies are tested, and a nation waits to see if the next king will rule with wisdom or with pride. In the next few moments, you'll see not just a prince becoming a king, but the birth of wisdom that would shake nations, the rise of a leader whose decisions would echo through generations, and the lessons you can take today about leadership, discernment, and trusting God even when the path seems impossible. Stay calmly with us, because what happened to Solomon isn't just history. It's a mirror for our choices, a lesson in power, humility, and purpose. And once you see the first steps of his journey, you'll understand why the Lord's voice, whispered in moments of quiet obedience, can change the course of a lifetime. The palace did not look like a place of fear. Gold still lined the halls, guards still stood at attention, servants still moved quietly from room to room. Yet beneath all of it, something was wrong, something unseen, but deeply felt. King David was dying, not in the dramatic way songs would later describe, not with a sword in his hand or enemies at the gate. Age had done what giants and armies could not. His strength faded slowly, day by day, until even warmth could not cling to his bones. Blankets were piled upon him, yet he still shivered. And when a king grows weak, ambition grows bold. Word spread quietly through Jerusalem. Advisors spoke in lowered voices. Military commanders watched one another carefully. Priests prayed more often. Everyone knew the question hanging in the air, even if no one dared speak it aloud. Who would sit on the throne of Israel? David had many sons, strong sons, older sons, sons who believed the crown should fall naturally on their heads simply because of birth order, and among them was Adonijah, handsome, confident, and dangerously certain of himself. He did not wait for permission. Adonijah gathered chariots, horsemen, and loyal men around him. He hosted feasts. He allowed people to call him king without correcting them. He smiled as though destiny itself had already bowed to him. And David said nothing, not because he approved, but because time was slipping through his fingers faster than words could keep up. Solomon watched all of this from a distance. He was not loud, not aggressive, not positioning himself at banquets or rallying soldiers. If anything, he seemed almost invisible in comparison, younger than Adonijah, less experienced, less obvious. But Solomon had learned something early in life, something most men never learn at all. Power that is rushed is usually power that destroys. His mother, Bathsheba, knew the danger immediately. She had lived long enough in the palace to recognize the signs. She had seen what unchecked ambition could do. And she remembered something Adonijah either ignored or did not know. God had spoken. Years earlier, when Solomon was still a child, the Lord had made his intention clear, not to the crowd, not to the army, but to David. Through the prophet Nathan, quietly, firmly, Solomon would be king, not because he was the strongest, not because he was the eldest, but because God had chosen him. And now that promise was under threat. Bathsheba moved quickly. She went to David's chamber, where the once mighty king lay wrapped in blankets, his breathing shallow. The room smelled of incense and old age. She knelt beside him and spoke carefully, because every word mattered now. "My lord," she said, "did you not swear by the Lord your God that Solomon your son would reign after you?" David's eyes sharpened. Memory returned like fire behind ash. "Yes," he whispered, "he shall reign." "Then act," Bathsheba replied, her voice steady but urgent, "for Adonijah has declared himself king, and the people do not know your will." David closed his eyes for a moment. Perhaps he saw the battles of his youth. Perhaps he remembered how easily kingdoms fracture when leadership hesitates. When he spoke again, His voice carried authority that age could not erase. "Call Zadok the priest, call Nathan the prophet, call Benaiah." Orders were given, oil was prepared, trumpets were readied. Solomon was summoned. He entered the room quietly, unaware that his life was about to change forever. David looked at his son for a long moment, not as a king studying a successor, but as a father weighing a burden he could never fully explain. "Be strong," David said. "Show yourself a man. Walk in the ways of the Lord." It was not a speech, it was a charge. And then it happened. Before Adonijah could secure the throne, before rebellion could fully form, Solomon was placed on the king's mule, led to Gihon, anointed with oil, and proclaimed King of Israel. The trumpet sounded. The people shouted, "Long live King Solomon!" The sound echoed through the city like thunder. It reached Adonijah's feast. It froze conversations mid-sentence. It shattered assumptions in an instant. Fear spread faster than ambition ever could. Adonijah ran. Solomon, now king, did something unexpected. He showed mercy. He did not order executions. He did not hunt his brother down. He set boundaries instead, clear ones, firm ones, wisdom before bloodshed. It was the first sign that this king would rule differently. But wisdom, real wisdom, does not come from a crown. And Solomon knew that. Soon after securing the throne, Solomon went to Gibeon to offer sacrifices. The place was quiet at night. No crowd, no politics, just a young king alone with God. And there, something extraordinary happened. God spoke, not through a prophet, not through a dream interpreted by others. God spoke directly to Solomon. "Ask," the Lord said. "What shall I give you?" Imagine that moment. Unlimited possibility, no restriction, no conditions spoken aloud. Solomon could have asked for anything. Long life, wealth beyond measure, victory over enemies, absolute power. Instead, he asked for wisdom, not cleverness, not intelligence, but a discerning heart. He said, in essence, "I do not know how to lead these people, teach me." Scripture records God's response simply, without drama, but its weight is enormous. "Because you have asked for this, and not for riches or long life, I will give you wisdom and understanding like none before you." And with it, God added what Solomon did not ask for: honor, wealth, influence. This was the moment everything changed. Not the coronation, not the trumpet, not the crown. This wisdom given by God himself. Soon, the wisdom would be tested. 2 women came before the king, each claiming to be the mother of a living child. No witnesses, no evidence, just grief, desperation, and conflicting stories. The court waited. Advisors whispered. The room held its breath. Solomon listened. He did not rush. He did not posture. He did not perform. Then he spoke. "Bring me a sword." Gasps filled the chamber. "Divide the living child in 2. One woman cried out in horror, the other agreed coldly. And Solomon saw the truth instantly. "Give the child to the woman who would give him life," he said. "She is his mother." The judgment spread through Israel like wildfire, not because it was dramatic, but because it was right. People realized something that day. This king was different. Wisdom began to shape every part of Solomon's reign. His understanding of people, of justice, of leadership. Nations took notice. Leaders sent questions. Kings listened. Israel prospered. Peace settled over the land. And Solomon's fame grew. But beneath the surface of success, subtle currents were forming. Decisions yet to be made. Temptations yet to appear. The kind that only reveal themselves when everything seems secure. And that is where the story deepens, because the same wisdom that lifted Solomon would soon be tested by something far more dangerous than ignorance and abundance. If this story is hitting you right now, pause for just a second. What you're hearing isn't just history, it's wisdom unfolding in real time. Stories like this don't come from rushing or noise. They come from depth, from scripture, and from moments most people skip past. And if you don't want to miss the next one, then this is your place. Go ahead and subscribe, not because of me, but because stories like this deserve to be followed. Now, let's continue. By the time Solomon's name began to travel beyond Israel's borders, it no longer moved as rumor. It moved as fact. Merchants carried it along trade routes. Envoys repeated it in foreign courts. Travelers spoke of a king whose judgments felt almost unsettling, as though he could see beneath words and intentions alike. People did not just say Solomon was wise. They said God was with him. And in those days, that distinction mattered. Israel entered a season it had never truly known before. Peace. Not the fragile kind that exists only because enemies are resting, but the kind that settles into daily life. Borders were secure, harvests were plentiful, roads were safe enough for long journeys. For the first time in generations, children grew up without the sound of war shaping their earliest memories. And Solomon began to build, not out of vanity at first, but vision. His father David had wanted to build a house for the Lord, but God had not permitted it. David was a man of war. Solomon, however, was born into peace, and that peace carried responsibility. The temple would rise under his hands. Years went into preparation before a single stone was laid. Cedar trees were brought from Lebanon. Skilled craftsmen were gathered from across the region. Gold was refined. Plans were reviewed and revised. Nothing was rushed. This was not just architecture. It was devotion made visible. When construction finally began, the scale was unlike anything Israel had seen. Stone upon stone fitted with precision, timber carved with care, every detail intentional. And when the temple was completed, Solomon stood before the people and prayed. Not briefly, not formally. He prayed with awareness. He spoke of heaven not being able to contain God, let alone a building made by human hands. He asked that the Lord would hear the prayers offered in that place, that forgiveness would be given, that mercy would flow. And when he finished, Scripture says fire fell. The glory of the Lord filled the temple so completely that the priests could not stand to minister. Israel wept. It was a holy moment, one that generations would look back on and say, this was when God's presence was unmistakable among us. Solomon had done what no king before him had done. And the world noticed. Kings sent gifts, nations sent questions. Philosophers traveled to hear him speak. His court became a place where ideas met wisdom, where disputes were settled, where insight flowed freely. Then came the Queen of Sheba. She arrived not with curiosity alone, but skepticism. She had heard the stories, everyone had, but wisdom that travels by word often loses something along the way. She came with riddles, hard questions, tests meant to expose exaggeration. Solomon answered all of them. Not one stumped him. Scripture says she was left breathless, not only by his answers, but by the order of his court, the excellence of his servants, the confidence of his leadership. This, she admitted, is greater than what I was told. She blessed the Lord publicly. Solomon's wealth increased steadily. Gold flowed into Jerusalem. Silver became so common it was considered of little value. Horses, chariots, rare spices, fine clothing, foreign treasures, all passed through his hands. And here is where the story becomes uncomfortable, because success changes the questions we stop asking. At first, Solomon's heart remained anchored. He judged fairly. He worshipped sincerely. He remembered the God who gave him wisdom. But slowly, subtly, almost invisibly, something shifted. Alliances were formed through marriage. One wife became many, many became hundreds. Each alliance seemed practical, strategic, politically wise. And with each one came new customs, new influences, new altars quietly erected at the edges of devotion. No single moment screamed betrayal. That is what made it dangerous. Solomon did not wake up one day and abandon God. He simply allowed other voices to coexist beside him. And the Lord noticed. God appeared to Solomon again and warned him plainly. The promise was still there, the blessing still available, but obedience mattered. If you walk in my ways, God said, I will establish your throne. The warning was loving, clear, direct, but abundance has a way of dulling urgency. Solomon continued to build. Palaces now, gardens, cities, infrastructure, everything flourished. and yet cracks were forming beneath the surface. The king who once asked only for wisdom now lived surrounded by luxury. The heart that once trembled at responsibility, now assumed stability, was permanent. And this is the tension many never notice until it's too late. Wisdom does not expire, but discipline must be maintained. As Solomon aged, the question shifted. Not how wise is the king, but how guarded is his heart. By the end of his reign, Solomon had accomplished more than any king before him. But the cost was rising. And in the final part of this story, we see what happens when a heart that once burned for God begins to drift quietly, without rebellion, without noise, only distance. If you're still here, stay with this story, because what is coming next is not just about Solomon's fall. It's about legacy, consequences, and why wisdom without obedience is never enough. There is a danger that does not announce itself with noise or chaos. It does not arrive like an invading army, nor does it break down gates in the night. It enters quietly, settles slowly, and often feels like comfort before it ever feels like threat. Solomon did not fall suddenly. He drifted, and drifting is always more difficult to notice than falling. By this time, Solomon had ruled for many years. His name was still spoken with admiration across distant lands. The temple still stood in quiet majesty at the heart of Jerusalem. Worship had not ceased. Offerings were still brought. Songs were still sung. From the outside, everything looked right. Israel was stable, prosperous, secure. Borders were firm, trade flourished, and peace remained. Many would have said this was the golden age of the nation, the proof that Solomon's wisdom had succeeded beyond measure. But beneath the surface, something subtle was changing. The wisdom that once kept Solomon cautious now made him confident. The humility that once drove him to depend fully on God was slowly being replaced by experience, success, and assurance in his own judgment. And confidence, when left unchecked, has a quiet way of softening boundaries. Solomon's alliances multiplied, many of them sealed through marriage. At first, each decision seemed reasonable, strategic, even wise. Peace was preserved, enemies were avoided, influence expanded. But every alliance brought more than political advantage. Each wife brought her culture, her customs, her understanding of the divine. At first, Solomon allowed space. He did not interfere. He tolerated differences, believing himself strong enough to remain unchanged. After all, he was the wisest man alive. He understood truth. He knew the law of the Lord. But influence does not demand permission. It works patiently. Tolerance became accommodation. Accommodation became familiarity. Familiarity became participation. His scripture records this moment without exaggeration, without drama, yet with devastating clarity. When Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God. Not abandoned, not hostile, just no longer whole. That single phrase carries enormous weight. Solomon still believed, he still knew God, he still remembered the nights when the Lord had spoken to him, the wisdom given, the promises made. But devotion divided is devotion weakened. Quietly, altars began to appear on the hills surrounding Jerusalem, places of worship raised to gods Solomon had once known only by name. The king who built the temple of the Lord now allowed other shrines to exist within sight of it. And God saw. The Lord, who had appeared to Solomon in the beginning of his reign with promise and blessing, spoke again, this time not with invitation, but with consequence. The message was clear. Because Solomon had turned his heart, the kingdom would not remain united, not during his lifetime, out of mercy for David his father, but after him. His legacy would carry the cost of his compromises. Scripture states it simply, "I will surely tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your servants." Solomon was not stripped of his throne. He was allowed to finish his reign in peace. But peace without joy is a heavy thing. As the years passed, signs of strain became harder to ignore. The demands of Solomon's kingdom grew heavier on the people. Labor increased, taxes rose. What once felt like prosperity slowly became pressure. The king who once listened closely to his people now ruled from distance. Wisdom remained, but warmth faded. Order remained, but joy thinned. Near the end of his life, Solomon did something unexpected. He reflected, not as a king cataloguing his victories, but as a man taking honest inventory of everything he had pursued. Wisdom, wealth, pleasure, accomplishment, fame. He had tasted all of it, and when he wrote of it, his words were not triumphant, they were sobering. Meaningless, he said. All is meaningless. Not because wisdom failed him, but because wisdom alone could not satisfy a heart slowly separated from devotion. Knowledge could explain life, but it could not give it meaning apart from God. Solomon died, and his son Rehoboam inherited the throne. And just as God had spoken, the kingdom fractured. 10 tribes broke away, civil division followed. What Solomon had inherited, united, was now divided in the next generation. The fall was not sudden, it was inherited, and that is where the story truly settles. Solomon's life is not a rejection of wisdom. It is a warning about assuming wisdom is enough. Wisdom can build, wisdom can organize, wisdom can rule, but only obedience sustains. Solomon began his journey kneeling, asking God for discernment. He ended it reminding the world that without reverence for God, even the wisest life can feel empty. And perhaps that is why his story still speaks across centuries. Because most people do not lose their way through rebellion. They lose it through comfort. They do not walk away from God loudly. They drift quietly. Solomon's life whispers a truth many learn too late. Guard your heart most carefully when everything seems to be going well. This was the rise, the glory, the quiet compromise, and the legacy that followed. This is the story of King Solomon, and it remains unfinished. Every time we choose what to do with wisdom when it is placed in our hands,